Today, we're at Planet Fitness and we're going to go for a routine, basically triceps and chest, work on that split for today only and see where it goes, right? So today when I warm up, I'll usually work with something light, so I'll adjust the weight towards maybe 12 or even 17. Doesn't need to be necessarily anything heavy, but just enough to get the blood flowing, engage the muscles for pre-heavy work. That's normally what I would start with before you go into anything more of a heavier set. Those normally are too heavy, lightweight sets I'll normally start with. Again, it's just to engage the muscles, get the blood flowing for more heavier work. So when you do start your lighter and heavier load, you're more adapted towards what you're going to be lifting, which will help you to not only adjust the working load, but help you to build more strength in the long term. Again, anytime I work with strength training of any sort, it's always to make sure I engage the muscles correctly, and by doing so, it's going to help in the long term towards developing growth and getting to where you want to be. So now the working weight at 27.5, and it's a set I normally work with on my first, not usually the second, only because it gets me exactly where I need to be, especially when I'm simply just starting out. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Now, a quick note when it comes to the attachment, a common mistake what most guys will typically do is they'll have the handle and they'll adjust it to whatever height they seem fit, and they'll immediately just grab the bar and immediately start roping, pushing the weight down, which isn't necessarily what you want to do. But when it comes to this, you simply want to make sure your arms are not rotated outward, but rotated inward in the way so you're able to extend out without moving the elbow or without moving any other muscle that is not the tricep itself in the exercise. That alone is what works best towards building your tricep on the side and really gets you to where you want to be physically in your own physique. So now we have 2 more sets in this exercise. Recovery time is normally about, for me, it's just 30 to 60 seconds. It's not anything too crazy, unless when it comes to compound like bench press, squats, or any other extensive exercise that usually requires more rest time, one, and second, that usually requires a lot more energy. I usually give it about 1.5 minutes to roughly 2 minutes, only because it gives me enough time to recover and it gives me enough time to really engage the muscles. It gives me enough time to focus on the exercise, control my breathing, regulate it, so I get the most out of what I'm actually working with. And long term, man, that's usually what I find to be the most helpful towards building muscle, especially towards where you want to be ideally, right? So now I'm starting my second set. 32.7 is where I have the weight adjusted at. Again, everybody's situation is different, right? So it's not really about comparing yourself to the other individual or where you are exactly with where you stand, but it's really having the awareness to know what you need to do and doing that consistently, doing it repetitively. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, So second set is usually runs out. It's the exact same way. And normally it works best when you work with the weight, never really against it. You work with weight that you're able to physically control. You're able to physically manage instead of weight that's too much for you to actually handle. One, it's because when you work with the right amount of weight, it helps you to engage more with the weight properly in terms of building muscle more effectively. And it just helps you to get the right contraction in, which will lead to long-term growth and better results. And if you're not seeing the results you want to see in your own physique, looking at it in different angles, whether it's I'm not using the right weight or enough weight to aid in muscle breakdown and recovery, or looking at other angles, like am I working with the right form or the right technique to ensure I'm getting the best or the most amount of growth or the best out of each and every exercise I work with. Small things I look at in every exercise I do. 5, 6, 7, 8. So that's my third working set on tricep cable rope pull downs. It doesn't need to be anything too crazy. All you need is really enough weight to really stimulate, enough weight to focus on in every exercise that you perform, so you're able to target the activated muscle breakdown, recover, and then ideally get yourself to where you want to be physically, which is building strength, building your frame out, or whatever your goal is. It starts with applying enough resistance continuously over time to get to where you want to be. Next variation of what I would normally do is I'll have the weight attached as is right here, but instead of doing it a simple variation where you're pretty much going in a downward motion, you're going to bring the weight up over your head and extend. And without rotating your elbows all the way out or bending them, you want to keep them straight and simply extend. Now you can do this with actual weights. For me, I'm going to punch it to 27.5 and start from there and go for about 8 to 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 9, 10. Now I'm going to use the second variation, overhead tricep extension. So the whole objective of the goal is to really make sure the cables are over your head in the basic movement, and you simply extend forward, and you want to control the actual position of how far you are carrying the weight versus flaring your elbows out or adding any other muscle groups that aren't necessarily involved in the movements, like the biceps or even the elbows itself. It's just tricep movement, which is all that should be involved in the actual direction itself. So now I'm punching the weight to 37.5 on the second and final set. So the same objective applies to progressing the weight. Doesn't matter if it's 5 pounds, doesn't matter if it's 10 pounds. As long as you're increasing the weight every single set, that's the whole objective of it. So usually it's about 2 or 3 working sets I'll always work with. Again, the goal is to always add the weight in any way, shape, whether it's 5 pounds, 10 pounds. As long as you're getting physically stronger on a bi-weekly or weekly period, it's also a good measurement to indicate whether you're getting physically stronger or if your body's adapting to the way you're currently working with aside from last week. Yeah, go ahead. So this is also part of my warm-up set. Again, it's usually about 2 to 3 when I start with it. Working set number 2. So normally when it comes to lifting with this weight rep, I'll usually stick to about a recovery of 60 seconds, maybe 90 seconds, depending on how heavy the lifts go. But the more higher that I go, I usually take up to 2 minutes, sometimes 2.5, just because it gives my body enough time to not only mentally prepare, but physically to get myself ready for the next weight that I'm going to lift, that I'm going to adapt to. So when it comes towards building cutthroat strength and really just growing your physique altogether, I mean, it's looking ideally at what you have going on in front of you, and it's working on a routine that's going to help you progressively up your strength, not just on a weekly basis, but even bi-weekly are good indications to look at, especially if the goal is to have long-term growth, and do it the right way and not to experience massive fluctuations back and forth. Now, I don't even know if I do have more, if I did bring them, but I usually do bring them in cases like these. Yeah, I brought them. Yeah, I brought them. All right, the next working set is going to be 55s. Yo, if the weight is too heavy, I advise you to lower the weight. If you can't do at least 6, it's also a good sign for you to lower it down to a point where you can actually control it. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So that's the 3rd working set. So we have about 2 more working sets of the same, not the same weight, but progressive weight. Now again, it's not a necessity because you really don't have to. But for me, I usually wear wraps only when I'm lifting heavier weight. So not only does it really safeguard my wrists, but and be able to just really just physically just work on the actual load itself, not worry about my wrist snapping or getting injured due to the fact I'm lifting more than heavier than abnormal weight, right? So everything really does work based on your weight class where you currently are at. Again, it's never a good thing to really compare your journey to someone else's because you don't know how many months, years they could have been on to get to where they are today, right? So it's best to just focus on yourself alone, focus on where you currently are at. And by doing so, it's gonna give you peace, man. It's gonna give you a peace of mind knowing you're not in competition with anybody but yourself. So it's always an important thing to really note on. All right, so against those 55s, right? So yeah, 2 more sets left. So your last 2 sets ideally should be something relatively intense. It could be 75, it could be 80% of your 1 rep max, or something along the lines of it. Again, the weight shouldn't be too heavy enough for you to not only do at least 3, but if you can do at least 6, it's really the bare minimum to really work on building strength, to really work on building endurance on that strength, getting to where you want to be physically. Four, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Something like that. And as you're lifting with the weight, it's also an important thing to notice when you are going on the way down, controlling the eccentric phase. You want to make sure that you're not abruptly or rushing down with the weight fast, to then use that momentum to spring the weight back upon your chest. That is something you don't want to work on or position yourself towards doing, or make a random habit of, only because it's not only is it going to lose adaptation towards the weight you're working with, but it's going to make it more difficult for you to adapt to other workouts that are similar towards a pressing motion. And if you keep making that same habit of rushing down with the weight and immediately progressing the weight back up, you are not going to see optimal or fair results out of everything you're doing. So it's always a good indicator to be mindful of, to make sure you're working with weights that you're able to physically control. And in doing so, by doing so, you're going to be able to work on the targeted muscle more effectively, versus just working on incorporating other muscle groups because you're lifting heavier than normal weight. Again, it's not really a necessity, but I use wrist wraps for that main reason, because it safeguards my wrists from any physical damage, due to the fact that this is weight that, of course, I can lift, but it's usually a weight that I'd rather use with wrist wraps. And if you're the same way as I am, then you'll want to go and grab a pair yourself and then really just start using it. It's not really about looking silly out here. It's not really about not wearing the thing, but it's about safeguard. It's about self-protection against your own self, right? Because the part of the game is also about recovery. So making sure you're able to meet the physical demands of the exercise you're currently performing, as well as the recovery side of it, those two things together is what's going to lead towards actual growth and your physique, and as well as helping you deal with better recovery habits, helping you build the physique you're meant to build. But none of that is going to be achieved if you're not having the right recovery between what you're doing and how you're going about the process altogether. But doing just that much alone, that is where the growth happens and where the growth resides. So be sure to work with what you have. Get wrist wraps.
Tap in with the last workout, which is going to be a seated incline press. So right now I'm sitting down on the machine right here, and I have the machine adjusted to target my upper chest, and the machine works the upper pectoral muscle mainly itself, man. So you got to do is adjust the weight to a position and weight you are comfortable with controlling, and work out with the weight, rep it out, lock in, and get it done, man. That concludes today's session of Planet Fitness. Tap in for the next one.